everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. This is Miles on the Grid, and I'm your host, Miles. In today's episode, we're going to be discussing the really controversial F1 Championship finale that occurred on the weekend between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. So let's get straight into it. So as I mentioned, the race was for the championship. Max and Lewis were level going into the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, level on points. Max had claimed pole on Saturday by 4/10, which is quite a margin, especially given the fact that everyone expected this to be a Mercedes-dominated track. However, he did make a lock-up. I saw a comment from Lewis Hamilton that it could have been an intentional lock-up when he was on his medium tyres within I believe it was Q2 or P or practice 3 earlier on the Friday. However, he started on the softs, and Mercedes had Lewis in second place, starting on the medium tyre. Now, heading into the race, Lewis had a rocket at the start. We saw videos online. We saw the race itself, and Lewis was up by about a tenth at the first corner, and he started to pull away from the rest of the pack by just over a second. Then, a little bit further on in lap 1, Max and Lewis had an incident at turn 1 where it seemed like Max did a dive bomb up the inside. To be fair to him, he kept it on track, but he just didn't seem to leave Lewis enough space. So Lewis took a runoff and went to the runoff area and went wide. However, in my opinion, at that point, he did gain a lasting advantage because he was a little bit further than Max up the road and didn't seem to give any time back, which Red Bull were protesting about, but Michael Masi, the race director, was adamant that Lewis wasn't to do anything else and had given that time back. But we'll touch on the race director's decisions in a few moments. However, after this, Lewis started to increase the gap to Max and to Sergio Perez. And it wasn't until Lewis and Max had both pitted that Lewis and Perez had a great tussle. So Lewis was on the hard tyre. I believe that Sergio was on the medium. I'll have to triple check that. But it was a fair and clean and on the limit race. You know, it was a nice showcase of world-class driving from both of them. It did bring Max back into play as Sergio had slowed Lewis down enough. But to be fair, that's quite honest. That's a fair thing to do. You know, there's nothing wrong with slowing a competitor down on track as long as you're not causing any danger and as long as you're not bringing the sport into disrepute. Now, I saw that Lewis had complained on the radio saying, you know, that's dangerous. Obviously, he knows a little bit more than us, given the fact that they're racing right on the limit, but it didn't look dangerous to me, if I'm honest. But it seems that Sergio's efforts didn't seem to make too much of a difference, because the gap between Lewis and Max, whilst it had closed down to just about 2 seconds, it started to extend again, and eventually, after the race started to turn, it became around 16 seconds. Now, this is where it gets quite interesting. On lap 53, Mick Schumacher and Nicholas Latifi had a bit of a battle, and it resulted in Latifi struggling for grip on the dirty side of the track and then crashing it into the barrier. At this point, if I'm honest, as a Lewis fan, my heart sunk, because I thought, okay, here's a safety car, here's what's going to happen. There's going to be the opportunity for the pack to be bunched up. There's the opportunity for people like Max and maybe even Valtteri to box for a new set of fresh tyres, which they did. So Max chose to pit under the safety car, knowing that a fresh set of softs couldn't do him any harm, whilst Mercedes chose to keep Lewis out on 40-lap old tyres, now as in the hard tyres. Now, Lewis did question that decision on the radio. He was like, hey guys, like, what are we doing? But Mercedes said, look, you're going to lose track position if you don't. Which, in fairness, under the safety car rules that they thought were going to go to the end of a race, that was the right decision. So, just to explain that in a bit more detail, as normally you'd resume racing after the safety car, there was uncertainty as to what would happen. And this is where it gets quite sticky because Michael Masi, the race director of the FIA for F1, he was lobbied throughout the race by both Christian Horner, Jonathan Wheatley, Toto Wolff, probably Ron Meadows as well from Mercedes, if I'm being honest. Now, Toto Wolff was saying and stressing that there was no need for a safety car, which was quickly rebutted by Michael Masi. Christian Horner, on the other hand, around lap 56, pleaded to Michael Masi that they only needed one more lap of racing. Now, that becomes significant because in the end, we did get one more lap of racing. Um, so I don't want to say that there was a. It's tricky to say because obviously you have to be watchful of what you say, but it's difficult to suggest that that didn't have an impact upon the ability for the cars and the drivers to go racing again. Um, Under normal safety car procedure, we would normally see lapped cars being able to unlap themselves and then gain position according to where they were. Now, this didn't happen. Michael Masi overnight changed the rulebook according to his apparent discretion within Article 15.3 and allowed the five lapped cars, excuse me, between Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen to unlap themselves, bringing Lewis and Max closer. At this point, I was thinking, what is going on? And I think I mentioned it on Twitter. I was like, this is madness. Don't get me wrong. If you're going to allow all of the unlapped cars to do so, allow everyone. Allow Carlos Sainz to be brought into the mix. Allow Daniel Ricciardo to be brought into the mix. But as soon as that happened, he then proceeded to say that racing would resume and the safety car would be brought in straight away, not on the following lap, which would be the normal procedure. Under the normal procedure, given the fact that the track was clearing but the safety car was still in effect, the safety car would have run the last lap of the race and then been brought in, which would have allowed Lewis Hamilton to be the race winner, which is the normal race directive. We've seen it exercised at the Nürburgring, or at the Eiffel Grand Prix, should I say, last year, when Lando Norris had that moment. And Michael Masi was very clear to all the drivers as well as the race directors that the safety car would run towards the end. So it was quite difficult to understand the differences. I understand that Lewis and Max are fighting for a championship, and it was a showcase. I get that. But the sport cannot be brought into disrepute. It cannot be allowed to become a farce, because under this farce of a decision, Max on 2 lap old soft tyres was up against Lewis on 40 lap old tyres. And I've seen people say, well, did you see the amount of slipstream that Lewis was able to get on Max, the amount of pace he still had? That doesn't matter, because if you know tyre management, anyone knows that the fresher tyre will usually outpace the older one. And I sound passionate about this because it really did irk me. Forget that I'm a Lewis fan. I've been a Max fan as well. That doesn't make any difference to this. The difference is that we saw Lewis Hamilton technically lose a world championship, and we saw Max Verstappen gain a world championship. Now, I'm going to reiterate, this was not Max's fault. I believe that he would have had the same thing done to him by Lewis if Lewis was in that position. This is an issue of the race director, and an issue when the FIA gives the race director the power to change a race or to suit the narrative of entertainment. I'm running out of breath because it really does bug me. Now, I've seen some people call it a conspiracy, and whilst I agree with elements, I cannot completely rule it out that this was an error in judgment, both by Michael Masi and potentially the team that he has around him. But what I will say is that when we have had the most views on us as a sport, we had Channel 4 broadcasting an allegiance with Sky. We had Ziggo Sport in the Netherlands. We've had BIN. I think we're even running features. We had all the world's tabloids and mainstream press looking at us, seeing how is this race going to unfold, bringing new eyes to the sport, bringing new viewership potentially as well. We deprived the person that deserved to win the title, Lewis Hamilton, at that point in time, of the championship. Now, I've seen comments from other people, whether it's Max fans, Ferrari fans, McLaren, etc. What about Silverstone, where Max had the 51G crash? What about Hungary, where Valtteri Bottas crashed into Lando Norris under braking and then caused a massive collision, taking out Sergio Perez and Max Verstappen? That's fair. I get that. Those were instances where you have legitimate cause to be aggrieved over the course of the season. But then you think about the other side, which has, what about Belgium, where the race was run according to qualifying, and due to the terrible conditions, the race was finished under qualifying. And a race win, which was crucial at this point in time, leading towards the championship, was decided on the rules of law. What about Imola, where we saw Max to be predominantly at fault for the clash with Lewis, although they both have a part to play, Lewis less so than Max? We can't look at these incidents in isolation and then point out one and say, okay, well, this had this and this had that. I get that Max was in the hospital. Apparently, there were precautionary checks, but I'm not going to get into that. I'm not here to argue, and I'm not here to take away from Max's year, which was quite stellar. If you listen to an early episode of a podcast this year, or this season, should I say, you'll hear me hype up Max's ability to be a world champion. That's not in question. That wasn't in question. However, based upon that last race, which was a decider, that's not where my viewpoint lays. Now, there may be a lot of you who disagree with me, and that's fine. I'm not here to argue, but to state what I saw and why it can never happen again. There's been accusations by certain members of the media, including people like Bernie Ecclestone, of Mercedes being sore losers by protesting the result and then actioning the intent to appeal straight afterwards. Now, if it was on the other shoe, I'm pretty sure, 99% sure, that you would have seen the same thing happen from Red Bull, because it's part of the sport. But what's not part of the sport are race results being twisted to suit an entertainment value. I don't want to say manipulated, because it was said by Lewis, and I don't have that specific data in front of me, but I can say what I saw. I saw that a race was twisted in order to suit an entertainment value. The entertainment that we get comes from the fact that we all love racing. You know, I love WC, I love WRC, I love GT. It doesn't matter to me where the racing comes from. No matter who's in the car, who's on the bike, we all deserve to be entertained only by skill and by bravery, not by an influence to attract new viewership, which will only decrease said viewership if the races are changed in the same manner. I'm really, really passionate about this because this could have happened to any team. It could have happened to Ferrari. It could have happened to Red Bull. In this instance, it happened to Mercedes. And it happened to the driver who deserved to win the title on that day. My hope is that the sport changes for the better, as whilst my love for F1 and motorsport in general hasn't changed, my belief in what it currently stands for has. So this is a sort of an open request to the FIA that we continue to allow the sport of racing to be dictated by racing. Clean, hard, fair racing. Not any sort of change of circumstances at anyone else's discretion.